Hello there, and welcome back to Writing from Scratch with me, Tom. On today's video, I want to talk a little bit about how you can include other languages in your book that aren't the primary language that you're using to tell your story. Let's get started. If your book takes place in another country, on a distant planet, or in another fantasy world, there could be lots of reasons why you might want to include another language within your narrative. Maybe you want to show some cultural diversity. Maybe you want to emphasize that this is a really different culture and society. Whatever your reasons behind it are, there are a few things that you should do and a few things that you shouldn't do when trying to include a language within your story. And let's explore those now. First of all, and most simply, don't use a translating application. While many of these can be perfectly adequate for traveling in the real world, they rarely provide contextually accurate translations and will make your lack of knowledge clear as day. It can be very tempting as a shortcut to use translators to display conversations in languages that you're not familiar with. But you should understand that you're only really damaging your own book by doing this, so it's best to avoid popular translation apps. If you do want to use another language, and want to find specific phrases or words, instead of using a translator, the best thing to do is use language forums online, or speak to a native speaker, as they will be able to advise you on the correct usage and nuance of their language. Doing that will provide a more respectful and authentic representation of the language. Moreover, you can get up-to-date information as well as access to additional information that can influence how you apply certain words and phrases. But any inclusion of another language should be kept short and isolated. Don't write full conversations. Use a single line, word or phrase to establish the context and the situation, and then proceed with the conversation in your book's main language. That can be rationalized easily by a single sentence explaining that they are just continuing the conversation in the primary language. Your audience will understand that you're focused on the story, not the language. And that's the real point. When you are including a language, you have a few different ways that you can represent this within your book. The first and most obvious is a direct inclusion of the other language's words or phrases. Generally, this should be done for words that either have no direct translation, or for common words that will be more familiar to your general audience, such as sushi from Japanese. For words without direct translations, it will be important that you provide an explanation, usually through dialogue, so that your audience isn't put off by unknown words or phrases. On the other hand, some words don't need to be explained, because it will be evident to your reader how similar they are to the same word in your book's main language, such as hello in Norwegian and hello in English. You can even expand this to wider phrases within a clear context. If your character is ordering something in a French bar, for example, having them say un grand bière s'il vous plaît will be clear to most European language speakers due to how familiar and similar the word beer is to its other counterparts, as well as them being able to use the context to assume the rest of the conversation and seeing the fallout of what was said. This can be a great way to include authentic use of a language, but again, just make sure that you're using the correct and appropriate phrases by speaking with a native speaker either face-to-face or online. If you've decided not to include direct excerpts of a language, but want to emphasize that a different language is being spoken, then this can be done through translation, either by a character within the story or technology within the book. The key is to state that the conversation is being carried out through a translation medium at the start of the conversation, and then continue it in the book's primary language. From here, your reader will just assume that the language has not changed and is still being translated. This is less work for you and keeps you focused on the conversation. More than that, constantly reminding your reader about how the conversation is being conducted rather than what is being said will definitely tire your reader and distract them from the message you're trying to communicate. Additionally, and the most simple method, is to simply state what language a character is speaking in and then leave it at that. Or keep things extremely simple and not draw attention to it at all. In film, having everything in English is often criticized as subtitles can be used to provide translation to differing audio. But in books, there is only one visual aid and no alternative. So it's perfectly fine to not draw attention to the language use at all, and let your reader simply assume translations have been applied. If your story is engaging enough, this small inaccuracy will rarely draw attention. So here are just a few hints and tips on what you can do if you want to include different languages within your book. The main takeaway is that this should be very, very short and sweet, just to add a little bit of colour. But really, it's not necessary to do lots of translation work, and you certainly don't need to learn a language in order to include it in your book. So good luck with writing your languages, and I hope you've enjoyed today's video. Please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing the video with your friends because it really helps the channel grow. Thank you very much for your time, and I'll see you next week.